You mentioned some of your experience in working with the life sciences, right, and pharmaceutical organizations. Where does this, and I think of that always as secondary use of data primarily, right, for research purposes versus primary use of data as care and treatment purposes. So when we start thinking about these secondary use cases, right, where are the friction points or choke points, right, to really deploying AI? Well, I guess, where is AI going to be applied first, at least in the things you're working on, and where are there still significant barriers, right, to making progress?
I think for pharma, for life sciences, let's just take life sciences and I'll include pharma in it and I'll give you some use cases for pharma. Life sciences in general, we are seeing, RWD, real world data vendors, who aggregate, anybody who aggregates from multiple sources, and most of the time they're going to data brokers and these data brokers are essentially getting data from multiple providers, and then they're anonymizing it or tokenizing it or de-identifying it, whatever the case may be, and then monetizing that data. And that's one place where we've seen anybody who aggregates data definitely is running up against the data quality problem, because they're not just dealing with data from one EHR, they're dealing from data from, you probably know this better than I do. Like, you're dealing with data from multiple sources, and that means your data quality problem just got multiplied by X. So that's definitely a place where we've seen it. The application of AI is, they're not only getting, it is one of information extraction. One is a structured data normalization, all the things that fit in neat rows and columns that I can normalize using various methods, both non-AI and AI. By the way, in those structured data, if I can solve a problem using regex, I'm not going to use an AI. I mean, if I can solve a problem using a fuzzy string match, there's no point in me applying AI to everything. That's one other thing philosophically, is that we believe in kind of daisy chaining multiple methods, and to keep costs down and to pass on some of that savings to our customers, is that we don't have to use AI in everything. So, but that's a little bit of a tangent. But coming back, when you're aggregating data, we also encounter clinical notes, and what our customers are telling us is that all of the good stuff is here, but I need to get it converted into a structured form so that now I have a larger mass of structured data to analyze. Bulk of what the interest we get from the life sciences world is information extraction. Can you do information extraction at a high enough accuracy, at a high enough speed, high enough throughput? Because I have sometimes 1 billion documents, 6 billion. I mean, it's staggering the number of documents they have. And can you do it at scale? And also, can you do it at high enough accuracy for us to increase our structured data corpus so that we can do better analysis on these patients and sell those insights? That my customer is selling insights to others, which is their business. My business is to give them as much data to analyze to get those insights. So information extraction is where we are seeing a lot of interest. And the reason we can do it well is because of these assets I mentioned, right? The terminology that, and that are represented in relational and knowledge graph ways, and we have editorial policies and other sort of assets, and combined with the power of LLMs, combined with other machine learning methods, we are able to do it at a high enough accuracy that we can provide that benefit. In the pharma space, the use cases that we are encountering are, number one is literature review. Or, you would think that, this has nothing to do with a clinical note, but in the pharma space, literature review is doing systematic literature reviews is a big deal. So whether you are developing a drug, that means during the course of the drug, you have to submit as part of the submission for approval, you have to submit systematic literature review. That means you have to look at available literature to say, is a particular molecule safe and efficacious for treating a disease, right? And you have to periodically do literature reviews. That means usually in the current state, that usually means you are hiring a consulting company to be able to go have a room full of people read through lots of articles based on a certain protocol and then summarize it in a table. That's what happens today, right? But this one is ripe for an LLM use case because you're not talking about clinical documents. You're talking about well-formed, grammatically correct, peer-reviewed journal articles that you're going and actually trying to read through a machine. And that is a big part of what we've solved for our pharma clients is this automating of literature reviews. So that they automate systematic literature reviews for them. There are other things that we've done. So the other things that we've done is during the pandemic, the drug has been released or the vaccine has been released. What is the sentiment on social media? Can we get access to social media feeds to be able to understand the sentiment, do sentiment analysis on those feeds, on those comments that users are putting through? What is the sentiment? Can you apply natural language processing techniques to do sentiment analysis? And that's sort of the one other use case. The third use case that I can think of is, can you identify key opinion leaders for pharma? And I think that's another use case that we've done.
Rajiv, actually, I worked for a long time at a company where that was what you just described. The 3 use cases was the entire business, and we did it with a room full of 80 plus people and manually. And we actually dreamed of the day that we were trying to develop some AI applications, but this was probably a decade ago now. And the tools just weren't there. So, it's very exciting to know the tools are there. By the way, the people who worked at that company doing that work, I don't think they really, it was a good job, but I don't think it was a particularly rewarding task just in terms of doing it, of reading articles every day. And most of them ended up going on to medical school, if I remember correctly. And the benefit was primarily that by reading all of those articles, you actually picked up a lot of medical knowledge along the way by reading them. You talked about an interesting concept just a few minutes ago that I've been focused on and my company's been focused on is really understanding what the value is in 2 aspects. Number one, precision. So when we use AI, right, and we worry about hallucination, we actually ask ourselves the question is, compared to some gold standard, let's say humans, like how precise was this? And we can measure that, right? You do it with a human, you do it with the LLM, you see where it's wrong. You have to be very careful, I think, and care, because being wrong is actually the worst thing. Like you might make a really serious mistake and cause a safety concern. The other thing that's now emerging from this, and we're starting to publish on this and we'll publish more, is the concept of information gain, right? So when I think about, I started with some set of data, right? I make the data bigger by extracting additional normalized elements out of it. And then the question is, how much more do I know at the end? And the reason I think the ability to quantify what you know is so important is it's very hard to know what you don't know. Like you can know what you know, but it's hard to know what you don't know. How do you all think about that problem of how do you know what you don't know? Is that a problem you've tried to tackle?
I'll try to answer that question in a couple of different ways. One is, when we try to use supervised machine learning, we still use supervised machine learning approaches. Not everybody's, by the way, in our experience, and I'd love to hear alternative points of view, is ready for use of LLMs. And I think just wanted to point that out is that, we use a multitude of methods for different customers. And, sometimes some customers are not even ready for AI. Some customers are ready for AI, but only in the supervised machine learning space. Some customers are ready for LLM. So those are the kinds of customers we encounter. And also, you're right about the tolerance for false positives. The tolerance is different depending on the customer, right? If you are a coding company, do you want high recall or do you want high precision? Like I think, they want to catch as many people so that they can adjudicate, on their own using human beings, I presume, right? But if you're in a clinical point of care sort of use case, you don't want to get it wrong. And training a model to work at a certain level of accuracy is one thing. But what keeps me up at night is once I deploy it, is there drift? And is there how do I measure that? Like, how do I get telemetry on that? And that is something, if you ask me, hey, what keeps you up at night? Like, yeah, we can work, during our process, the sales process, we usually, when customers approach us, they give us a corpus of data saying, we want to test your abilities as an organization, both software and human, in this space. So we get a corpus of data. We do what's called a data quality assessment. Our NLP scientists, our physicians who are on staff look at this data, look at the different ways that are problematic in terms of how they're documented. We train the model to pick up those idiosyncratic ways that they're documented, and the model is tuned to that. And then the model starts to function in a way that the customer likes or customer approves of. We get it to a precision recall F1 score that's accurate, that's the customer is comfortable with. And then we present the results to the customer. Then they accept, and then they say, okay, let's sign on. Now the question comes deployment. And the question is, okay, we've deployed it. Now the question comes like, this is where, how do I monitor how it's doing in the real world? And for us, we are, if it's deployed, and it's also depends on where it's deployed, right? So most of them, because of the PHI concern, want this deployed on-prem and in a containerized fashion. So now once you do that, it has reduced my ability to peek in sometimes to see what's happening with that model. So I have to periodically go check it and things like that. If it's deployed within our own cloud environment, it's easier for us to monitor how that model is doing. And the only way I do that is by constantly looking back and checking how the model is doing and push updates to it. And I think this concept of surveillance, one thing is to actually train a model and deploy it, and another one is to keep it from drifting off. Yeah, and I think that's the only way I know how to do it, is to create, if it's on-prem on the customer, I'm using on-prem in a very loose sense of the word. It could be on the customer's cloud environment. How do I get that telemetry of data to do that surveillance? And it's easier if it's deployed as a SaaS service here. We can actually do that much more easily. So surveillance is the only answer I have to that, but it is something that we need to, all of us who are in this field who do AI and natural language processing, we have to constantly surveil, because we don't know what's happening to that model once it's deployed if we don't do that.
Yeah, I think you bring up a great point. It's one that I actually believe very strongly in. Like, we have these great, amazing tools that have been coming out. The field is moving very, very quickly, right? Lots of new technology, but you can't break away from the basic concepts of architecture and workflow, right? And they have to go hand in hand. So architecture, right? Just thinking about the basic structure, the engineering, right, that has to be done to manage some set of components has to be very closely correlated to the workflow, which needs to deliver business value, right? And when you put those kind of pieces together, then you're able to deploy these tools. And I think, to your point, you have to be able to monitor them. Like, you can't just assume, particularly with these algorithms that intentionally essentially drift over time and learn from themselves, can continue to function properly.